Welcome, everybody. We still have a few people joining, but you will see the link to the sign-in sheet in the chat. Nicole has put that in there for us, so please take a moment and sign in if you haven't already. And I am pleased to introduce Pauline, who's here to address a question that comes up quite a bit from our districts that are using NWEA, and that is, how might this tool help me as an instructional coach, specifically the MAP assessment and the reports that they're using. So with that, I will turn it over to Pauline.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining live. I'm sure you might be trying to shovel down lunch before you got to get off to the 8,000 other places that you need to be. So it's nice to get to share this moment with you. Just a little bit about myself before we jump in. As she mentioned, I'm Pauline Zdonek. I am an account manager for NWEA for the Great Lakes, which means I cover this area of Michigan, kind of southeast Michigan. And then I also help with Wisconsin and Minnesota, and I'm located in Illinois. So I really get the whole Midwest feel going on, the whole landscape across the Midwest. Prior to NWEA, I just joined in the spring. I was a building middle school assistant principal for about 5 years and love that. So any middle school people out there, shout out to you guys. And then before that, I was actually an instructional coach myself. I was actually a mathematics instructional coach. I started off in my own building where I had been a teacher, and then they moved me K-8 district-wide, and I covered multiple schools. And then it turned into a coach coordinator type of position, as often sometimes happens in these roles. We just get things added on more and more to our plates. And before that, I was a middle school math teacher, and then before that, a K-8 special ed teacher. So I always try and think of those experiences as I support districts and remember all those different hats that I have worn myself. So you'll hear me today reference a lot of things that I might have done as a coach myself or as a building principal. Assistant principal, we really supported literacy. We focused on power standards. We progress monitored with Lexile. So I'll talk a little bit about that literacy piece as well. And then I look forward to kind of hearing from you guys and taking questions and talking next steps as well. Here's kind of the roadmap of what I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about the RIT score and what MAP growth assesses. Many of you, I'm sure, were teachers prior to this role, and you may have had your students take MAP growth yourself, so you may be familiar with it. But I really want to highlight what MAP growth is and what it isn't as well, and how it might compare to some other reading measurements as well, as you have a lot of data that you are bringing into your decisions and helping teachers with. Then we'll kind of go through the reports from a lens of an instructional coach, and how can these reports support you with working with teachers and PLCs. And then if you have questions or want to take some next steps or any follow-ups, we can talk about that after. So I just want to do a little background on NWEA, because I think it kind of frames where we come from and how we approach things. NWEA is a not-for-profit. We are really a not-for-profit research organization. So we're not owned by a private equity firm. We're not a textbook company. Our focus is really in the educational landscape and supporting education from a holistic view. We are an organization that was created by educators and for educators. So I mentioned I'm on the Great Lakes team, and I will tell you that every member of my team was an educator in the schools at some point. They were district admin, they were building admin, school counselor. So we all have been in that world, and now we are supporting from a different lens, but we always like to keep connected to that world. And that is why we really all focused around our mission is partnering to help all kids learn. Our CEO will say a test has never changed a kid's life, and we 100% believe that. There are so many pieces that go into student learning and student growth, and we just want to support in the ways that we can help in the areas that we do well. With that said, most people know us for MAP growth, and that is definitely probably one of our biggest areas. But in the last 10 years, NWEA has really become a full service learning organization. MAP growth and our assessment is one piece in a much larger puzzle, as I've said, of student learning. So we have our assessment world, which we will be talking about MAP growth today, and you're here because your district uses MAP growth. We also in that assessment world have MAP reading fluency, which is our K2 specific, K5 really reading early literacy assessment screener, progress monitoring, dyslexia screener assessment tool. We have some professionalized learning through MAP Accelerator, which is our partnership with Khan Academy. And that is really math focused, but some of you might wear the hat of interventionist as well. So if you're familiar with that, because it's often used as interventions, you might know that arm of our organization. We do things at NWEA, what we do really well. And like I said, we do assessment really well. We are not a curriculum and instruction company, but we partner with people who are curriculum and instruction experts so that our data can work with their resources to help create personalized learning paths. I'm going to touch on it a little bit at the end in terms of some of those literacy resources and how our data works with them to support students. And then finally, as I said, assessment is just one piece of a larger puzzle. And we have professional learning as well that it both supports MAP growth, but also is independent of MAP growth. So we have professional learning by experts in areas of equity and using data as a lens to view equity, or we have some on the learning to read and the science of reading, or math and how students learn fractions. We have a whole school improvement side that looks at climate and culture data to help schools and districts work on leadership and building school culture so that they can turn schools around. So as we talk about MAP growth, I like to put that in that perspective that we recognize that there is a lot to the educational landscape, and we are one piece of that. And we just want to support as we can you and your teachers doing the best that you can to support student growth. So you're here because your district takes MAP growth. Most likely you take it in the fall and the spring. You probably also benchmark in the winter as well. If you are a district that does use MAP reading fluency, you probably take that the same benchmark times as well, and then progress monitor for certain kiddos in between. And if you're someone who uses MAP Accelerator and intervention, that would fall between those times as well, but we're not really going to touch on that. We're here to talk about MAP growth. So the first part I want to talk about MAP growth, really what it is, so that we can understand how to use the data to support teachers, and also what it's not. So MAP growth is a grade level independent assessment. So you as a teacher and your teachers that you work with, they have 30 some students coming into their classroom. So a 7th grade teacher has 25 to 30 students possibly coming in their classroom, and they are the master of their domain. They know their standards, they know their curriculum, they are ready to work to get those students to become proficient at those 7th grade standards by the end of the year. But the reality is, as we know, is that students really come in at all different readiness levels to learn those grade level standards. So what MAP growth does is give educators a picture of where all those different readiness levels are, so that as educators are making decisions on unit planning and lesson planning, they have that lens to be able to design supports for students wherever they're at. To do this, students, as they take the assessment, are given a RIT score on a RIT scale. The RIT scale, I say it's like a yardstick or a measuring stick. So I give the example, I am 5'9". I turned 5'9" in my wonderful adult age that shall not be named, how old I am. But I, as a middle school AP, I had 10-year-old boys that were 5'9", right? And then outgrew me. So we all hit the certain landmarks, we just hit them at certain times, but the scale stays consistent. So the RIT scale stays consistent across time, however old the student is, for the different grade levels. And it's a way to measure and benchmark where students are at any given point in time. So how does this help teachers, and how does this help you support teachers? So as teachers have these students and they look at their student group, the benchmark assessment allows us to kind of look at students in a lens and look at our unit and lesson planning from that lens. So we will have a group of students that are in that zone, that are ready for those grade level standards. They are ready to tackle the curriculum and the grade level text as given. We will also have a group of students that are going to need some scaffolding and support to reach that grade level expectations. And knowing that as teachers go in, and then you as the support going in, can ask those questions. How are we going to design this unit with this group in mind to support them? How are we going to make these texts accessible to these students? How are we going to scaffold our support so they can also be successful with these grade level standards? And then we're going to have that group. I call this my Miriam group. I had a student named Miriam, and she was fantastic, a wonderful young lady, and she devoured every text that was given to her. Her lexile was off the charts. We didn't have a program that could capture her lexile. So her 7th grade honors teacher would come to us and say, like, I just don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what to give her. She just devours it all and is ready for the next. And so being able to support teachers in that realm as well, when they've got those Miriams, what are we going to do in this unit that's going to continue to push these students that are going to take in everything we give them and then want more? You know, how do we continue to challenge these students? So having that benchmark data to look at our units and our lessons in this way helps us be ready to support those students in the moment. The way we look and kind of benchmark that data, you can look at it in two different ways. So the first way is through our normative data. So MAP growth is given to over 1 million students across the US, which means that when it comes to data, our sample size is very large and it's representative of the population. So if you reference back to your Stats 101 class, right, we all took in college, we got a large sample size and it's representative of the population, leads to more reliable and valid data. So if you take all the students that take MAP growth and we line them up and we look at, say, fourth graders in the fall, a fourth grader in the fall, if we go right in the middle of that traditional bell curve, smack in the middle, that 50th percentile, fourth graders across the US are coming in at a 196-ish RIT score. So this helps you and teachers look at the data and say, okay, these kids are coming in above a 196. These ones are going to be above the 50th percentile, and these ones are below. And it gives that national benchmark of where students are at as they come in, or at any point in time, in the winter, in the spring. This is different than grade level. This is not saying that a fourth grader should be at a 196 in the fall. Why is that? Because the reality is grade level is different in every different state. So we think about Michigan and our grade level standards, and a 7th grade standards in Michigan are different than our 7th grade standards in Texas. And now Common Core has helped even some of that out amongst the states that use it, but you really honestly have 50 different states and 50 ways that they determine grade level and 50 different standards for what they say grade level is. So for you as an educator in Michigan, what we do is have linking studies to what is considered grade level proficient for Michigan. So this is an example for the fall. We take our RIT scores and we tie them to the M step, and between, depending on the grade level and the time in the test, they are about 77 to 90% accurate in predicting where students will fall in the M step in spring. So in this way, you can look at it from this lens and really see, okay, in Michigan, to be grade level proficient as a fourth grader, if I have a fourth grader at that 196, right now in fall, they're only projected, if we don't change anything, they're projected to be partially proficient in terms for Michigan for grade level. Whereas if I'm looking at a student to be proficient on grade level in the fall, ready to be proficient, most likely if they make their growth, they would be at a 201, which is the 60th percentile. So in this way, as you're looking at data, you're able to see where Michigan considers proficient. And if you're looking at how do we get our students to that point, to proficient and advanced, to what Michigan considers college and career ready, this is a way to benchmark that data. Now, this is different too than potentially other reading assessments that you're using as well. So other reading assessments, as they may level, you know, they have A, B, C is kindergarten and D, E, F is first grade. That is based on their own research and their national expectations of what they say is grade level, which again is different necessarily than an M-STEP or different states. So there's a lot of different ways to view grade level. So we offer the normative table and the M-STEP linking study, so you can see both where the students are in a national landscape and for Michigan specifically. So how does MAP Growth assess students? And again, many of you are, I mean, all of you are teachers, and many of you probably use MAP as a teacher. You know that the first time a student takes a test, they will get a grade level question. If they get it right, it gets more difficult. If they get it wrong, it gets a little easier, until it levels out to about that 50% range, 50% correct, 50% incorrect roughly. And that is that zone of proximal development that we are looking to determine with that RIT score. And if you think about it, you know, if the students are getting all the questions correct, if they're getting everything right, it's too easy. They're not really learning. If they're getting everything incorrect, It's at a challenge level that may not be accessible. It may cause shutdown. They might not be able to kind of find an access point. But when we're in that zone of proximal development, it is both accessible and challenging. And that's that prime learning zone. That's that productive struggle we're looking at. And that's what we're trying to find with the RIT score. Something that we pride ourselves on at NWEA is having the smallest standard of error of measure of assessments. This is important because districts are making very important decisions on students based on data. And we want that data, we want our data to be accurate when they're making these decisions, when they're deciding who should be in an intervention, who should be in AP classes, things like that. We want the data that's presented on our behalf to be as accurate as possible. That said, we 100% advocate that all data should be triangulated. Our data shouldn't be taken alone. So for example, when I was a building admin, when we were looking at placing students in AP classes going into high school, we looked at a benchmark assessment. We looked at their end of the year test score, their state score. We looked at their Lexile level from a different program that monitored Lexile. And we looked at teachers' summative grades. We were roughly standards based and teacher feedback. So we had all these data points encompassed together to give us the full picture of where students were at. I tell another story. We were working on our MTSS system, and we all at we have 5 middle schools in our district. We all kind of had a different way of doing it. Our middle school, we felt very comfortable with how we did it. Again, we chose Lexile, we chose teacher recommendation, we looked at state scores, and we had a process that we felt comfortable with. And our district came in and said, here, we pulled this standard data from the elementary. We want you to use this. And I would look at the data and I'm like, you're identifying this kid for an intervention and they're in my honors class and they're getting an A. Like, this doesn't line up. So when the data is totally off base, it ends up getting thrown out. It ends up making decisions, wasting time trying to figure out how to make decisions based on data that doesn't align. So that's why we find it really important that our data has, our test has such a low standard error of measure. So when teachers are like, oh, it takes too long, I want a shorter test. There are shorter tests out there. They're going to have a much larger standard error of measure, and that means that data is a little more questionable in where the students fall. We also have a very large item pool, meaning students won't see the same test question, and the depth of knowledge in the questions is beyond just the basic recall for all of them. There's the depth of knowledge at level 2 or 3 for up to half of the questions. So we're really looking at a lot of different pieces. When we look at what MAP Growth assesses in terms of literacy, especially knowing that you are potentially using other literacy screeners or assessments, MAP Growth really assesses one piece and other screeners assess other pieces when it comes to kind of the literacy spectrum. So when we're looking at it, as I mentioned, MAP Growth is aligned to state standards. So the test items for Michigan are specific to Michigan and they align to the Michigan state standards. Obviously, for other reading benchmarks, they're more national, they're for that specific program. So they're aligned to that program and those reading leveled books. MAP Growth is adapted by the computer, and obviously it is computer scored, so it is objective in that nature. Leveled reading measures obviously are adaptable by the teacher, so the teacher picks a passage, wants to level up, level down by choice, but there is the teacher interpretation of the data. And that's not like a poo-poo type of thing. It's just the nature of teaching. Like, we are caring individuals as teachers. We hear our students, we know what they mean, we know we feel like we know what they read, but there is that subjectivity to some of these measures that when we're looking at how data aligns, we need to consider that when things have different types of measures. If one score ends up here and one score ends up here, we are looking at different types of scoring, which is why sometimes they might turn out a little differently. MAP Growth 2, especially when we go to the 2-5 and the 6+ test for reading, is independent reading comprehension. The students are in the text, they're answering questions in the text, they're able to reread it, dig in to answer the question. Whereas oral reading measures are specifically looking at oral reading. So they read the passage, they do the accuracy, the words correct per minute, and then they retell. So they're not digging into the passage, they're not re-looking at details, they're telling from memory how well they read it. Can they answer these comprehension questions? So they're really looking at different types of reading comprehension as well. And then MAP Growth has literature and informational text woven. It will break out the 2 scores as when you look at student scores, but it does give an overall RIT score. And we all know students, some students will die. I mean, I have a son who will read informational text all day, but ask him to read a novel and it's like, oh my gosh. So his scores can be very different depending on the text that he's reading. And depending on your district and the protocols you use, sometimes those scores can depend whether you provide both literature and information. You provide one time and a different one another time. So taking those into consideration when you're triangulating data, both data points are important. It's a reason, like, we have MAP reading fluency, which measures oral reading fluency and retell and things like that, because both of those measures are important, but they're also measuring things that are slightly different. So we need to take that into consideration as we look at our data as a whole. I give this as an example. This is a 3rd grade reading standard. So you look at kind of the depth that you're looking for in terms of when you're assessing students on those reading comprehension skills that are tied to those standards, and thinking about how that's measured versus how a retell or a reading fluency passage is measured. One thing I like to highlight, because I don't know that everybody knows that it exists, is within MAP Growth, there is a MAP Growth skills checklist. I'm talking specifically to you K2 people. This is for the foundational skills. It's not adaptive. It's assigned to a student. They do 20 questions. It gives you a percentage. They identified 70%, blank, blank, blank. But it's good for monitoring progress on some of those foundational skills. And I just like to highlight this because sometimes it's not, people are not aware that that's there, especially for some of you that supports the younger learners or help support some intervention pieces. This is helpful. So really it boils down to, now that we've got this data, we kind of know what we're looking at in terms of what it assesses versus what some other of our reading measures are assessing. How are we going to use this with teachers? Like, what can we do to support our work with teachers? I want to be clear here on what MAP Growth is. MAP Growth is a benchmark assessment. It means it's a flashlight at a point in time to where a student is at. And then it is a flashlight at another point in time and where a student is at. It will never replace the summative assessments that teachers do in their classroom. They are teaching these standards and they are assessing their students on these standards, and it will never replace that depth of information that's teacher summative assessments. It will also never replace formative assessment. And as a coach, especially if you dive into some of that student-centered coaching, some of the Diane Sweeney work, like digging into that formative assessment piece, the student and student work, is crucial to driving student learning. And I will never say that MAP Growth would ever come close to replacing that. What MAP Growth can do is provide kind of a benchmark and a framework for looking at unit and lesson planning and starting those conversations with teachers about areas they may want to dig into, and then using that formative assessment along the way to kind of see how you're doing in that coaching cycle. So when I think about the reports for MAP Growth, I think about starting big and then kind of narrowing the focus. So here are some of the reports. I'll go through each of them, but kind of thinking broad with the student growth summary report that looks at a whole school or a whole district and helping focus your time and where you want to put your efforts. And then as you kind of funnel down, then you have some information that can help with PLCs and grade levels. And then there's some specifically that get into the nitty gritty with teachers and working with teachers. And then finally, if you have a really good rapport with teachers and you're able to do some reflections come winter or come spring, we have the ASG report that really is helpful in having some of those, asking some of those questions and those reflection pieces. So I'll kind of go through each of them, but that's kind of, in my mind, I go through the report step by step. So the first one I would look at is the student growth summary report. Some of you may have seen this before, some of you may not. It will depend on, it's an administrator access level. So if you have admin access, you should have access to the report. If not, I'm sure you can have somebody run it. You can pull this from a whole district perspective. And if you're someone who plans PD at a district level, that can be helpful. I know we would have monthly PDs with a math focus. So then we would pull this to kind of determine, okay, we can't be everywhere at once. Which PD do we really want to dig into? Like 3rd and 4th grade struggling, we're going to be here, as opposed to middle school is kind of independent. They can do their own thing. So it really would help us dive in. From a school level, you can see each grade level, and it shows you, in the first test session, which is the fall, like I recommend looking at last year's fall to spring to get a benchmark. Where the grade level, where the mean RIT for the grade level was in the fall, what the achievement percentile was, what the mean RIT score was in the spring, what that achievement percentile was, and what growth was observed for the grade level compared to the projected growth. So really, though, it's this chart that kind of helps visualize it. So the diamond is the projected growth, where that grade level was expected to grow. And then the purplish blue box is where they did grow. I have a colleague whose phrase I stole. She says, you always want the diamond in the blue box. So looking at this, as a coach, I would love to say that you have the opportunity to work with every teacher in your building for true coaching cycles. But the reality is you are probably spread very thin, and you don't have that opportunity, even if you wanted to, even if every teacher was clamoring at your door, which in reality doesn't always happen. So sometimes it's nice to be able to kind of pick focus areas. So in this one, I would ask some questions on this growth report. So in this report, what grade levels are excelling and what are they doing well that we can share with others? So in this report, I would be investigating what 5th grade is doing and what kindergarten is doing, and thinking about what are ways that I can share what they're doing with other teachers around the building. We had a fantastic 8th grade ELA PLC. They were dynamite. We would have other people observe. We had schools from outside the district come and observe them. They were just so fantastic that we used every opportunity we could to use them as guides and as supports in the building. And also, teachers often like to learn from each other. So it's an opportunity as a coach to facilitate that kind of peer-to-peer observation or peer learning that you can do. The other question can be, what grade levels could really use your support? So like if I saw this, I would look at this 1st grade, and that might be my personal goal for the year. Like I'm going to get myself into that PLC, and I'm going to figure out what's happening. I'm going to see how I can support them, because this is an area that we want to grow this. We need those babies to be moving farther down the needle. And that's an area that I can bring my expertise and my supports to that group. So this is a nice way to kind of think about, how can I be targeted and strategic in the support that I'm giving when my time is thin. From there, if you are working with a PLC or a grade, the grade report is nice. I personally like it for the beautiful color coding down here. And these are this is my Sandbox generic account. These instructional areas are specific for state and state standards. So questions that, if you're able to be in a PLC, especially like in fall, they've taken their data, they're looking at their grade level data, asking some questions around, what stands out to you? What instructional areas are we excelling at, and what do you attribute that to, right? Maybe it's fall and we want to say, well, clearly last year, those teachers rocked out the informational text, and applause to them. Maybe it's winter and we're able to reflect on our curriculum and say, oh, we really dug into this here, and it's showing up on our grade level report. We're really proud of ourselves. What instructional areas could we also focus on? Is there an area that we want to target from fall to winter to maybe push our students in? Here, maybe we would like to dig into that vocabulary. Maybe there's an area here we can make a personal PLC goal around. Where do we see these instructional areas in the curriculum? And how can we weave some of these into the classroom activities that we're doing? And then that gives you as a coach a good opportunity to really either dig in with the PLC. Are we creating a PLC goal? Are we creating, we are going to do, every Wednesday, we're going to do stations, and we're going to have a vocabulary specific station where we're going to do differentiated activities. And then you're helping the PLC in planning activities and executing and helping collect formative data along the way. These conversations can be a jumping off point. You can break it down then to the teacher level too. In the class report. The class report is very similar to the grade report, just specific to the teacher. So either maybe the PLC is not functioning quite the way you want to, and you're not having those conversations, but you can get in at a teacher level, or you've had the conversations with the PLC and now individual teachers have invited you in to look at their classroom. This does become a little bit more challenging at the middle school level because you have multiple blocks that you're looking at. Those sometimes the conversations are around what trends do you see in your blocks? Are they similar? Do you notice differences? How do you want to support the different blocks in different manners? For K-5 teachers who have the one class, similar questions around this. What areas do you notice of strength in your class? What areas of growth do we have? Are there goals you want to set? Like, this is an area I want to target as a personal goal. And as a coach, can you help support them in designing some strategies and pulling some resources and interweaving that into what they're doing? At the teacher level, the class profile report is something that you might work with the teacher as you are designing those instructional activities. So for the teacher, each teacher has, this is an interactive report, and they have it for each of their classes. So it has the classes and it's able to be sorted. So you can sort it alphabetically if you want to look at the kids. You could also sort it by RIT. So let's say you're working with a teacher who wants to do some really targeted collaborative grouping activities. Maybe we want to make some strategic heterogeneous groups. And maybe I want Lewis down here to be paired up with Doris. And then maybe I want Kelly and Odell in there as well. So I have kind of students that represent different areas on the RIT scale that can work collaboratively together. Maybe Lewis and Doris could make a good partner pair and they can work with each other. Maybe I am working with a teacher on that vocabulary goal, and he or she has said that we are going to do these stations once a week, and I would like to make some homogeneous groups here. So I can sort by vocabulary, and then it'll go through vocabulary, and maybe right there I can do, okay, these 5 are going to be in a group, these 5 are going to be a group, and I'm designing my all my stations in that way. One other way I like, oh, I have a question on the class profile. Why don't you jump in?
Hi, I just had a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This report that you're showing right here with the sorting functionality, is that the same as the class report or is it different? Like, can you show how you got here really quickly?
Sure. At the end, I'll go out and I can show you exactly. The class report is like a static PDF. This is an interactive page, but they're like kind of right by each other. So I can show that at the end for sure. Okay. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. One other area of sorting I like personally as a district, as a school that looked very much at Lexile, is by sorting through Lexile. So I will say our NWE stance that I believe in as well is that access to grade level text is an equity issue. All students should have access to grade level text. They will never grow to that level if they're not exposed and working with that level of text. So one thing to use this for, but there also is an importance with them being able to read at an independent level and feel successful and engage at text at their own level. So as you support teachers, you're undoubtedly supporting them in picking texts of all different Lexile, at an anchor text Lexile, which is the grade level, supporting students at their different Lexiles. There's a lot of complexity in there. So as a teacher can sort by Lexile, this is an example of high school. They can look at, okay, the anchor text I'm using for this lesson is right here, right? So I know these students are going to be fine. I'm even pretty sure that these students are going to be fine in accessing the text. But my friends down here, what type of strategies are you going to use as a teacher to help them be accessible to that grade level text? Are we going to do some pre-teaching of vocabulary? Do I want to stop and do a little chunk and chew with them? Do I want some guided questions along with it? And you can help the teacher think about those things and how they're going to help make those students, help them access the grade level text. At the same time, this is nice for if you are determining some independent text levels. So for example, we used a program that did give us level text, like one article and then the same article at different Lexile levels. You might not have that resource. So as an instructional coach, you might be helping pull resources for teachers. So we are going to do our mini lesson with the grade level text, and then you're going to break out into small groups and do a similar activity with a text at a different lexile. And this would help you pull articles at the different lexile levels that students can access to help make some small grouping activities or some different accessible text groups. As you are digging in, if you are in that position of digging into some instructional activities with a teacher and designing them, another report I like is the class breakdown by instructional area. This is one of my favorites. As a teacher, it was one of my favorites. I would have this printed off for my 3 blocks and I would be able to reference it. So let's say you are supporting a teacher in working on their research unit. They're about to do a research unit with their class. So you are going to take that class and we're going to just highlight and really look at that informational text line. This is where our students' writs specifically line up for informational text. I'm going to look at that linking study, and I know that writ level that's going to be on grade level. So these guys are going to be ready to go. They're going to take the curriculum resources I'm giving them or the extra supplemental resources we're pulling, and they are ready to rock it out. These are friends that as we're planning this unit together, I may be asking the teacher, okay, what are we going to do to help these students scaffold them in to some of these texts? Are we going to use a main text together? And then maybe as they're doing their research unit, I'm helping pull some resources that might be a little more accessible. Are we going to do a pull-out group where we're digging into the articles together? Are we using other strategies to help them access these texts or dig in areas that they are struggling? But having those conversations ahead of time prior to the unit and helping the teacher kind of think through those things so they're ready to go as the unit rolls out. And then these friends, do they need higher text levels for their research unit? Do you want to just pull things from the New York Times and see how they can dig into them? Can they pull text from National Geographic? Do we provide text to the other groups and let them kind of go on their own? Are you comparing and contrasting 2 texts, and maybe this group we want to throw a third in there? So having those questions as your unit and lesson planning with this kind of broken out can be a helpful guide. This links to the learning continuum. And I recommend when using the learning continuum to do test view and to, in the options, go to group by standard. I want to put a qualifier on the learning continuum. 2 qualifiers. 1, it can be overwhelming. There are a lot of bullet points in that learning continuum if you've been digging into it. It is not a checklist. It is not a let's hit all of this, because when you look at that, there's a tendency to be like, nope, shut down, not touching that one. That's too overwhelming. So if you are able to help teachers and guide them to some target standards and some target skills, that can be very helpful in making this more manageable. My second qualifier in the learning continuum is specifically for reading. It can look a little repetitive because, as you guys know, as a literacy experts, so much of the reading skills depends on that text complexity. Determining the theme from The Lorax by Dr. Seuss is a lot easier than determining the theme of The Sound and the Fury by William Faulkner, right? That still makes my brain want to explode. So you can see sometimes in the learning continuum, determine a theme, determine a theme, determine a theme, because it's going to depend on that text level and that complexity there. But as I said, if you are looking at trying to design some supplemental activities, if we want to do a station and we want to hit on some areas that our students need support in when looking at that writ zone, you can pull up by standard. Sometimes you might want to, like, this gets the 3 writ bands next to each other. You may want to look at like 190, and then you might want to jump to 211 or 220 to kind of really look at the different ranges that there are. But like here, for an example, you can see I can pull for this standard 3.1 that this group I can design a station around locating details about characters in the text, whereas another group might be making inferences about characters in the text. So we're all working on characters and we're all hitting this standard, but I'm going to be working at it in slightly a different way with the different students and helping teachers dig into that and finding those nuances and how we make things more accessible for some groups and then more challenging for other groups, and how we help kind of differentiate in those ways is I know hugely beneficial to teachers, and they appreciate that help so much. I had the qualifiers at the beginning about the learning continuum, but I'm going to kind of hit this one as well. The learning continuum is no way, shape, or form a replacement for curriculum. Like the expectation is all of you as districts have well thought out curriculum and pacing guide, and learning continuum can help pull some ideas of activities that might help supplement. It's a way to kind of interweave some of the things that students see on the MAP test and that they get assessed on through the flexibility and some instructional strategies that go along with the lessons that you already have going on. But it's also not like exactly what every student needs to know or what every student knows. One thing I get sometimes is I want MAP growth to tell me exactly what a student needs to learn next and exactly what each of my student needs to learn next. And I had this conversation recently and I said, well, if we really stop and think about it, think about one grade level and the standards. And think about how in depth the standards are and how many classroom assessments have to be given to determine whether students understand the standard or don't understand the standard. And then multiply that by, like, take that a few levels up for different grades, and then think of all the standards in the few grades below that, and then multiply that by 2 to include math. You're talking about like a 7-day assessment right there. Like if you want to get in exactly what every student needs to know, that's not happening in a 40-question test, right? We can give a zone of where the students are at, and these are the topics in the learning continuum that are in that zone. What specifically Joey needs to learn different than Amy, that is a part of that formative assessment piece and working with the students. So I do like to do that kind of qualifier right there as well. If you were a classroom teacher, you probably know the ASG report. Not if you were a classroom teacher, you were all classroom teachers, but if you use MAP Growth as a classroom teacher, you are probably familiar with ASG report. If you have a relationship with a teacher that you've been working with as a coach, where they are in a safe space with you and you have a trusting relationship, this report can be a really great reflection point to ask some questions and really dig into some additional pieces that can spur their instructional strategies. So if you're not familiar, the ASG report, it is for growth. So you have your first benchmark time and the RIT score and the percentile. Your second benchmark, it could be winter or spring. The RIT score for students or percentile, their projected growth, what their observed growth was, and then whether they met their growth. And then it charts the students on this quadrant. Everybody loves the quadrant. So the bottom is achievements, where the students started in their achievement percentile. Here it's set to 50. You can change this to be a different percentile. So if you're looking at like college and career ready, I want to see like proficient on the M step, you could change this to the percentile that they need to be proficient on the M step, and it would move it over there and adjust the graph as so. And then this is their conditional growth percentile, which means if they're at 50%, they hit their observed or their projected growth target. If they're up here, they grew more than their projected growth target. And if here, they grew below that. So as you're looking at this with the teacher, as you look each quadrant, so your green quadrant, these are the kids that started off in a high achievement and they grew. So that's an opportunity to celebrate with the teacher. Like, this is amazing. High fives. What is going well with these students? What are you doing and how can we share that with others? Because this is working and that is awesome. This orange group is really a cause for celebration too. These guys didn't start as high in their achievement percentile, but they're growing. So they're making up ground. So what kind of strategies are you using with these students that's working, that you accredit this growth to? What is making that connection for these students? This red box is those students that started at a low achievement percentile and they're not growing. So here are some of our friends probably with IEPs. So the questions are, what are the accommodations? Are the accommodations working? Do we need to talk to the special ed teacher and get more ideas for this student? Is this student in an intervention? Should they be in an intervention? Do we need to talk to the interventionist, which might be you also? and talk about different strategies I could use with the students. Who do you need to reach out to help for the specialist that might be able to help us with these students? And then these are our friends that I kind of call the under the radar group. This is where some really interesting reflection conversations I think can come in. So they started off in a high achievement percentile, but they're not growing. I call them under the radar because they're probably the kids that are doing all their work in class, they're getting decent grades, they're not causing a scene. So they're not ones that always come up when teachers have conversations and they're struggling, but clearly something's not connecting because they're not hitting those growth targets that we want them to hit. So some of those reflection questions for those teachers, you know, what is the engagement level with the students? What type of activities do they seem to engage in and what do they not? Are we using different strategies? You think of that culturally responsive teaching. Are we using independent learning along with collaborative learning and all different learning strategies to hit all of our different students? What is their engagement in the text? Do we have texts that are reflective of my student population? How is my relationship with a student? Are these students that it might be worth the next month taking a little bit extra time and really developing that relationship to build that connection? This can build in a lot of different opportunities, especially if you're someone, I already talked about the Diane Sweeney mode for the coaching, but if you're like a gym night style coaching person, right? Like some opportunities to do some gym night style coaching. Like, let's talk about who we're calling on, and I'll come in and I'll observe you and I'll know all the kids that you call on, and then we'll analyze the data on who you're calling on. And maybe you're calling on these guys all the time and these guys aren't raising their hand, so they're not getting noticed. Like maybe there's an opportunity to dig in. Let me come in and do an engagement check, and I will come in and take data on engagement, and we can analyze, are these guys as engaged as these guys up here? So it could lead to some opportunities for some really deep coaching cycles based on where the teacher wants to go, which is really cool. Something that I highlight that, again, is going to takes a vulnerable and trusting coaching relationship is that you can filter it out over here by these subgroups. So if that is an area where the teacher is comfortable in, that is an opportunity to see, like, are there differences between our subgroups? Like, we had a teacher at our building who was comfortable with this, and I supported our instructional coach. We went in and we did a call on by ethnicity. So we took all the data and then we analyzed, was the teacher calling on a certain type of student, like white males more than somebody else? And that teacher was in a spot where they felt comfortable letting us in and having those conversations. And if you have that relationship, or you have a building where that culture is there to have those conversations, this can be an interesting reflection point as well. So I have one more report to highlight real quick, and it's very granular, so I don't know that you're going to use this much, but I highlighted in case some of you do play that role as interventionists as well. It might be a part of like your small group intervention work. So within the class profile, if you click on a student, it'll bring up their student profile where you can see the different scores they have in the different areas they tested. It shows their growth and achievement, their projections. Here it'll be like projection on the M-STEP, where their Lexile is, their growth over time. It'll dig into those different instructional areas. So if you are supporting a student and you want to dig in a little bit more and like, okay, you know, Doyle here he's not connecting with that informational text. I wonder where some areas are that I can support him. Or you've got like a tier 3 group and I want to dig into each of my students and really figure out what I can do for my next round of interventions that I can focus on. If you click on that instructional area, it does come up. You can look at the instructional area, you can group by standard, and then you can have develop or introduce or reinforce, and then you can scroll and it'll show the items under each standard that student could be working on at that time. So again, this is really student specific, which is not necessarily where coaching wise you might be getting, but if you are working intervention or you have a teacher that's coming to you like, oh, I just don't know what to do with this student, it might be an opportunity to dig in and kind of talk through a little bit of the student specific data. So I know I have about 10 minutes and I do want to show in the sandbox real quick where I can show you where all the reports are and hopefully answer questions that I haven't looked at in the chat. But a few just quick items just specific to you guys. As I mentioned before, we don't do curriculum or instructional resources, but we do connect with the people that do them well. So for example, like Achieve and Newsella provide the differentiated text options. We link with these resources, and then our data goes in and it helps create those personalized learning paths for the students. So if you are a district that uses these resources and you want to see about connecting it for students, especially if, again, you are one of those interventionist roles as well, we do connect with all of these. I really appreciate that we connect with so many different ones, because different platforms are good for different types of students at different ages. So I love that option to really customize for your district and your students. It doesn't have to, though. You can use them independently. As I mentioned, we do professional learning outside of MAP Growth. We are starting to roll it out. We do it for schools and districts, and we're starting to roll out more individual professional learning. These are 2 specific ones in our fall workshop series. So our fall workshop series are short, bite-sized PD. I know it's very hard to get away. They're during the day, just a few hours. They're only $75. But for literacy, this one obviously is passed, but our next literacy one is for K2, understanding students, how students learn to read. And then this one, again, kind of go into that piece I was talking about before. If you are in a district that is digging into some of these equity conversations, this one down here, the equity focused data frames, really digs into how we can use data to kind of view some of these different trends in our data and equity, which is really interesting. And then last but not least, if you are around on the 17th, we are, and I say this knowing that I'm pretty sure registration closes today or Thursday. We are doing a leadership summit. It is like a mini conference, a one-day mini conference where you have multiple sessions going on at different times. Different districts are coming in to present on what they do well with MAP Growth. It's an opportunity to network with other districts, learn from other districts in Michigan that are doing well. We have some NWEA people presenting. There's a number of instructional coaches registered, I know already. It's really for instructional coaches, building admin, and district admin to kind of dig in and network. So that is that. Before I leave and start digging into some questions and the sandbox, I did want to just put up my information. So if you have questions about the reports, if you want to ask anything, just reach out. Like, that's why I'm here. I love talking to people. I loved coaching. If you want to talk about Diane Sweeney versus Gym Night and all that stuff, like, I love digging into that, or MAP Growth, more specific, please reach out. If you happen to be in a small district, Molly might be your person. But again, if you're not sure, you can reach out to me and I will get you to the right place. If you are a charter school, Susan is your lady. So we all kind of have specialties in this area, and districts work very differently depending on their size. So it just kind of allows us to understand how our districts flow and kind of get into a groove.